There is a man in his late 30s standing in a parking lot, ignoring a brand new Mercedes parked 3 feet away. He is staring at a 1995 Toyota Supra. His breathing has slowed. His jaw is slightly loose. He hasn't moved in 40 seconds. If you asked him why, he would say something about the engine, the lines, the feel. But that answer is a distraction. The real answer is buried somewhere in 1997, in the back seat of his father's car, watching the world blur past a rain-streaked window while a specific song played on a cassette deck. He isn't looking at a car. He is looking at a door back into himself. This is the behavior. It happens everywhere. Grown adults stopping mid-conversation to watch a 90s Honda Civic roll by. People spending retirement savings restoring vehicles that cost less new than a modern laptop. Marriages quietly strained by garage time, and almost none of them can explain it in a way that makes rational sense, because the explanation doesn't live in the rational mind. It lives much deeper than that. Understanding where it actually lives requires going back, not to childhood, but to an entire cultural era that encoded itself into a generation without asking permission. The 1990s were a specific kind of decade for the automobile. The Cold War had just ended. Economies in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia were expanding. There was a collective exhale happening across Western culture, and into that exhale came machines that felt alive in a way cars before and after them rarely did. The Toyota Supra, the Nissan Skyline GTR, the Dodge Viper, the Honda NSX, the Mazda RX-7. These were not just products, they were emotional propositions. They said something specific about speed, possibility, and the future, and they arrived at the precise moment when an entire generation was between the ages of 8 and 17, which is the developmental window psychologists call the reminiscence bump. Research consistently shows that memories and cultural experiences absorbed between roughly 10 and 25 years old carry disproportionate emotional weight for the rest of a person's life. The 90s car didn't just enter the market. It entered a generation's identity during the most receptive window that window would ever have. But the cars alone didn't do it. What amplified everything was the media that surrounded them. In 1995, a film called Bad Boys put a Ferrari 348 on screen in a way that made speed feel like a moral right. In 1998, the Fast and the Furious franchise began taking shape in a short magazine article about street racing in New York, and by 2001 it had turned a generation's relationship with import cars into something almost religious. Gran Turismo launched on PlayStation in 1997 and taught millions of children the specific weight, gear ratio, and corner behavior of cars they had never sat inside. This is critical. The brain does not sharply distinguish between experienced and simulated experience when emotion is present. A 14-year-old spending 300 hours racing a Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution through a digital Tokyo highway at midnight is building a genuine emotional relationship with that car, not a metaphorical one, a neurologically real one. Television deepened it further. Initial D brought Japanese Toge racing culture into living rooms across Europe and North America with its hypnotic combination of Eurobeat and mechanical precision. Top Gear in the UK was reshaping how an entire continent thought about automotive identity, turning car preferences into a form of personality expression as serious as music taste or political alignment. What people misunderstand about this period is that they assume they chose their favorite cars. They didn't. Their favorite cars were chosen for them by an extraordinarily dense network of cultural signals, and then those preferences were reinforced so many times across so many platforms that they calcified into something that feels like a personal truth. There is a well-documented phenomenon called the mere exposure effect. The more a person is exposed to something, the more they prefer it, regardless of any logical evaluation of quality. By 1999, a teenager in Manchester or Melbourne or Minneapolis had been exposed to specific 90s car models through films, games, television, posters, bedroom walls, and schoolyard conversations so many times that the preference became neurologically hardwired. By the time that teenager became an adult with disposable income, the feeling didn't present itself as nostalgia. It presented itself as taste, as discernment, as knowing what a real car is. This is the layer most people around them cannot access, which is why the behavior looks irrational from the outside. A partner watching someone spend 8 months restoring a 1993 Mazda RX-7 sees a financial decision. The person doing the restoring is engaged in something that feels closer to archaeology. They are excavating a version of themselves that felt more possible, more open, more kinetic than the version that now sits in meetings and pays mortgages. The car is not the point. The car is the technology for the excavation. This pattern has a historical precedent that makes it easier to understand. In the 1980s, men who had grown up in the late 1950s and 1960s began obsessing over vintage American muscle cars: the 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, the 1969 Dodge Charger, the Ford Mustang from 1965. Economists and psychologists noticed that the market for these cars exploded not when the cars were new, but precisely when the generation that had been teenagers during their release reached their late 30s and early 40s. The pattern was exact. It had nothing to do with the car's mechanical merit. It had everything to do with the reminiscence bump triggering at the moment financial capacity aligned with emotional longing. The 90s car obsession is not new. It is the same river running through a new landscape. What makes the 90s specifically potent is the texture of the technology. These cars existed at the precise threshold between analog and digital. They had enough electronics to feel modern, but enough raw mechanical presence to feel tangible. You could hear the engine, you could feel the turbo spool. The steering communicated road texture through the wheel in a way that modern vehicles, designed for efficiency and isolation, no longer do. When someone says a 90s car feels alive, they are describing a genuine sensory profile that has largely disappeared from new vehicles. The emotional response to that tactile reality is not imaginary. It is a response to something that actually existed and no longer does. Grief is a reasonable response to that kind of loss. And there is a specific grief operating beneath this entire behavior that almost nobody names directly. The 1990s were the last decade before the internet reorganized human attention and identity. The car culture of that era had a physical texture: magazines you held in your hands, posters with weight, car shows you drove to, conversations in parking lots that lasted for hours. Community built slowly through shared presence rather than shared screens. When someone restores a 90s car, they are not just restoring the vehicle. They are attempting to restore the conditions under which genuine human connection around a shared passion felt possible. The car is a portal, not to the past, but to a specific quality of presence and attention that the contemporary world has made increasingly difficult to access. This is what the behavior actually is: not escapism, not irrationality, not arrested development. It is a sophisticated, if unconscious, attempt to maintain contact with an earlier self that formed during an unusually rich cultural period, using the most emotionally loaded artifact from that period as the instrument of contact. The man standing in the parking lot staring at the Supra is not failing to move on. He is doing something quietly precise. He is checking that the self he was at 14 is still accessible, that the part of him that felt speed as possibility, that felt the future as something open rather than scheduled, is still present somewhere beneath everything that has accumulated since. The 1995 Supra in that parking lot has 180,000 miles on it. The paint is slightly oxidized near the rear quarter panel. It is not worth what people pay for it by any conventional measure. But the man looking at it is not making a conventional calculation. He is performing a kind of internal audit. And when the owner comes back, starts the engine, and pulls away, the sound that moves through the man's chest is not nostalgia. It is recognition, the feeling of being briefly, completely known by something that cannot speak. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing.